Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is a tech talk presented by the Collab Lab, and Nick Taylor will talk about end-to-end testing. If you don't know what the Collab Lab is, we are a nonprofit organization. We provide skills training for early career developers. So we don't teach coding, but we pair people up in groups, and we try to give them as real world experience as possible while building a software app. So we go through PR reviews, we go through presenting our code, we go through pair programming, just as real world as possible. Our next cohort starts April 2nd, and our applications are actually currently open. So if you would like to apply, feel free to go to our website, and all of the information is there. There are just a few questions to answer. This presentation is recorded. Recording will be posted on YouTube and our website tomorrow morning. And with that, I will turn this over to Nick Taylor. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Tatiana. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Hopefully you don't see all those Zoom things popping up on my screen. Are those showing up for people? Or do you just see that? Okay, good. Cool. All right. So yeah, so we're going to talk about end-to-end testing, specifically with Cypress. So let's get to it. I'm assuming everybody can see my slides. I figure I always ask that at the beginning instead of at the end because that would be awkward. Yeah. Cool. All right, so a little bit about me. I'm a staff engineer at Netlify working on the ecosystem team, specifically frameworks. So my job is to make sure whatever you're deploying to Netlify, it just works, whether that's like Next.js, Remix, etc. I'm from Montreal, Quebec, Canada, East Coast representing. Online, I'm pretty much Nicky T online everywhere. You can also find me on my website. I also stream, as I was mentioning in the chat just before we started recording. So feel free to check that out. There's the YouTube as well as like if you want to check out the schedule. And I'm also not a big fan of spiders. I'm pretty good with the smaller ones these days, but once they start getting bigger than a quarter, you might not find me in the same room. So anyways, I digress. Yeah, so what are we going to cover? We're going to talk about what is end-to-end testing, and then we're going to see what is Cypress. Then we're going to set up Cypress in a project. We're going to look at writing your first test. And then the rest of the talk is really going to be more demo time, which is just what we're going to do is I spoke to some folks in the Collab Lab Slack, and one of the cohorts was kind enough to share their project that they did. And we're going to use that project to actually write some end-to-end tests against. So I think this will be super useful because for anybody who's in the crowd that is part of the Collab Lab, this is something that you could do to enhance your existing projects, which I think would help you stand out from other folks in terms of when applying to jobs, or, you know, if you're talking about your projects and stuff. So that's why I wanted to specifically use an actual TCL project. Cool. All right. And let's move on from here. And I'll just mention, feel free to ask questions during the talk. You don't need to save the questions for the end. I'll just do some time checks every now and then just to make sure that we still cover everything. But don't hesitate. I might not see everything because I'm presenting at the moment, but Tatiana or somebody else, if you could just mention somebody has a question, and then we can go from there. Okay, so what is end-to-end testing exactly? I'm not going to give some super long formal definition. I'm going to give something more practical, and it really is, end-to-end testing is really something that allows you to test your application through a whole flow in an actual browser. So for example, think of testing a login from literally filling out the form to make sure, you know, you get logged in and then you end up at some landing page for like maybe an account. Could be as well something like testing out a critical part of your application, like in the TCL projects, we have a shopping cart. So we want to make sure like I can add something to the shopping cart. And if I make changes, these tests can actually ensure that it's still doing what it's supposed to, or if we do need to make changes, we can do that. But that's essentially what it is. There's all kinds of other testing, which we're not going to go into today, but there's also unit testing and component testing. I know I spoke to one of my friends who works at Cypress, Mark Noonan, and probably somebody from there, it might be Mark or somebody else, will probably be giving a talk about component testing. So that's something to look forward to in the future. But for now, we're just going to focus on the end-to-end testing. So what is Cypress exactly? So Cypress is an end-to-end testing framework, meaning it's a tool you can use to write tests that run in real browsers. When you're doing local development, it also provides you a user interface. So like you have this GUI where you can actually see the tests run, and they run in actual browsers. And Cypress supports multiple browsers. Currently, it supports Chrome, Microsoft Edge, Electron, which is just another environment that you can run things in, and Firefox. I'm not sure about the status of Safari support, but I know it's being worked on. So this is something that's super interesting because not only can you test your project in, make sure the flow works, but you can ensure that in all the browsers or major browsers that it actually works. There's other things you can do. You can configure it for different environments. So for example, if I'm doing local development, I might have a different setup because I'm running my site locally. But if you're deploying it and before you deploy the site, you want to run like the tests in your continuous integration or continuous deployment process, you can do it there, but it would be different settings probably because like the website that you're testing against is maybe in a staging environment, or maybe just it's basically not your local development area. Other things you can do is there are commands in Cypress, which we'll see when we look at the tests, but you can extend these. You can create your own custom commands to do certain things. So for example, like when I worked at dev.to, I put Cypress testing in place there, and there was like a lot of common things. So like I wanted to make sure like we had all these tests and I wanted it to test this login flow. So I had like a custom command to just do that login flow. So it's not something somebody had to do every time they wanted to do a test where they had to have a person that's logged in. So these are things that you can do. At the end of the day, you're writing JavaScript or TypeScript, depending on how you set up your project. And like I mentioned, your tests are running in a real browser, which is pretty common these days, but before it wasn't always the case. Or like if you've ever run, for example, I don't know, some kind of tests in say Jest. Jest is actually not a browser environment. It's a Node.js environment, and they have something, you can use a tool like JS DOM, which kind of mimics a browser, but it's not a real browser. So something that might pass there might not actually work in a real browser, or you might have weird behavior. So I think it's super important that you're testing these things against a real browser. Other things you can do with Cypress is you can configure it to record screenshots or take videos of when an error occurs. So like say something goes wrong with you're testing your login flow and just things don't work, you're not sure what's up. And the videos definitely I find more helpful when you're in the deployment environment because you can't see what's going on. So it's kind of nice to see this stuff sometimes. And these are things that aren't required, but these are just some of the things you can do with it. So we're just going to talk briefly about setting up Cypress. So Cypress, you can install it in like an empty project if you want, but typically you're going to be working on an existing project. And so there's a few things you want to install. So you want to install Cypress itself. So you can run that by running npm install Cypress and -d. -d meaning you want it to be a dev dependency. If in your package JSON, because I know most of you have worked on the Collab Lab projects and probably most of you have done web dev. The dependencies are what you want for your application to run, but the developer dependencies are the ones for like, you want to run your tests or, ESLint, stuff like that. So we want to install it there. And speaking of ESLint, another thing you want to install, because most projects I would say these days have ESLint installed, is you want to add the ESLint plugin for Cypress. This just sets up a bunch of rules for ESLint for Cypress so that you just don't get all this red everywhere with all these errors. So it'll add some stuff like it'll be aware of that on the global. So like if you type CY, that's like the main Cypress like entry point to all the commands. It'll be aware of that. So you won't get an error saying like, I don't know what CY is, for example. Another thing which we will touch upon, it's not part of Cypress itself, but I highly recommend installing the Cypress testing library. This was something that was created by Kent C. Dodds. There's a lot of people that maintain this now. It's not just Kent, but this is something that enhances Cypress, and it allows you to write tests by requesting things on a page in a more accessible way. So you can say like, go get me a button that says, add to shopping cart, versus as we'll see in the test later, like you don't want to rely on like, go find me a button that has a CSS selector. Like, I don't know, you've got like a bunch, if you're using Tailwind, maybe it's got like all these classes on it, and it's not something that you want to rely on, because if you change the styles, that test will break, because it's not a reliable way to get that particular element in the page. So you typically, and we'll see this more once we start writing some tests today, but you really want to typically get something that is reliable. And I find using something like Cypress testing library is super useful for this.
Hi, Nick.
Okay.
Maybe this is a
Now,
good time to ask a question. Yeah, a question popped up.
Yeah.
So how would you pick your end-to-end testing? How would you choose between Cypress versus something else? Playwright was something that came up as an example. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so Playwright is newer. I personally haven't used it that much. We use it a little bit, I think, on some projects at Netlify. But I know it's got a lot of popularity and it's a lot more mature. Like this talk is definitely not to say that you should use Cypress over Playwright. That's not what this is about. It's more, I just happen to be using Cypress to showcase how to do end-to-end testing, but I've heard really great things about Playwright as well. There's also other testing frameworks, like there's a lot of them that are Selenium based. So like they're written in Java, or like you can run them in C#. Like you might run these tests in different languages as well. But for most of us here, I would assume a lot of us are probably more front end or full stackish, and being able to write the tests in JavaScript or TypeScript is, I find, super useful, and Playwright does this as well. So I would definitely encourage you to check out Playwright as well. Just for myself, I just don't really have that much experience with it, but it definitely looks super promising. It's based off of, if anybody's ever heard of Puppeteer, which is a project that came out of Google. Playwright was started by Microsoft. I don't know if, I think it's still Microsoft that, like, it's an open source project, but I think it's a bunch of people from Microsoft still. And they basically took Puppeteer, but made it work for all browsers instead of just Chrome. So it's a similar API, I believe, as Puppeteer. But again, I don't have that much experience with it, so I can't speak to it too much. But definitely try it out. Okay.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, no problem. So I'm just going to go through a few screenshots of this is what you would typically see when you run Cypress for the first time. So this is after we've installed all the dependencies, like I mentioned previously. And then this is what happens when you run npx space Cypress space open. npx is just the way to start it initially, but you can add a script in your package.json. So you could have something that says like I have in the project I'll show later, I have a script called E2E, and it just runs Cypress open, which will result in the same thing here. So this is like, say, the first time you're using it on a project. So you're going to be presented with two options here. We're not going to talk about component testing tonight, but that is something that Cypress does offer. We're going to focus on end-to-end testing. So we'll click on the end-to-end testing, and in here it says it's not configured. So you're going to be presented with another screen where you can create a new spec, so a test that you want to write. They'll generate like just a kind of like a basic test to just start things off. But you can also click on the scaffold example specs, and what this will do is it'll generate a bunch of tests that run against a Cypress, like a cypress.io website somewhere, and you can see kind of a lot of the features through that. In what we're going to go through tonight, I'm not going to go through the scaffolded examples, but that's something that when you set it up, it's definitely something you can add to just kind of learn a little more about Cypress. So this is if you were adding all the scaffolding stuff. So it's going to add a few things here. Important things that we do need though, and these you do want to generate. So there's the Cypress configuration. This is kind of like where all the configuration to run it is. And we'll see this once we look at the code. And aside from that, there's a few other things here. Like I was talking about custom commands before. You can add them into this commands.js file. And this is also the E2E. This is like .js file. This is something like if there's something you want to run before the tests, you could. It's not something mandatory, but it's just something that's available there for you. And then from there, this is like if you were to scaffold the existing tests that Cypress offers. And then from there, you'll be presented with a screen where you can actually start running those tests. So you could run the scaffolded tests, or if you're in your own project and you have your own tests, you can run them. And this is where you're given the option, like, do I want to run it in Chrome, Edge, Electron, or Firefox? And the ones that you see here are based on what's installed on my computer. So Electron will always be there because that's the app that's running Cypress is an Electron app. But I happen to also have Chrome and Edge on my computer as well as Firefox. So that's why you see them there. But again, in regards to Safari, I think it's still being worked on because I'm on a Mac, so I do have Safari, so it's not showing up. So I'm going to assume it's just not ready for prime time yet. Yeah. And then, so this is kind of a view of when you're running Cypress. So this is kind of like when you're in development mode and you just kind of want to see like, okay, I have my list of tests here. Okay. Maybe I'll click on the todo.sci.js test. That just happens to be the way they name these tests, sci.js. And the thing to be aware of is this whole test runner, it's in a browser right now. Like if you look at the top left there, you can see there's a browser tab. This is Chrome open at the moment. And then you can see I'm still in Chrome and it's actually running the test. So you'll see like a checklist or failure of stuff that's happening. And your actual website that you're testing is showing up in there as well. And this is something that I think is super important because the fact that it's running in an actual browser means you literally have all the tools that you have in a web browser available to you in here. So you can like right click on something, inspect it. You can open up the developer tools and see the console, for example. So what all your developer tool skills that you might have, you can use those in here as well, which I think is super powerful because I had worked with older end-to-end testing frameworks before and you couldn't do that. And so it was a lot of just like trial and error a lot of times, or just figuring why things weren't working. So yeah, so that's pretty interesting, I think. Okay, so let's talk about writing your first test. And before I jump into here, does anybody have any questions before we continue? Okay. Cool. So let's look at what a test might look like. So I don't know how much testing experience people in the crowd have, but if any of you have ever used something like Jest, this might look familiar. So you can have like a describe, whoops, except I'm clicking on the actual screen instead of, That's what happens when you're doing a live demo. It's not a real screen, Nick. All right, let's go back to that. 1 second. All right. Note to self, do not click on fake screen. All right. Yeah, so you'll have like a describe function, and in that you'll have an it function. So the describe is kind of like, you could have several tests in there and you would describe what you want to do within there. So in my case, I'm saying smoke test because this is just a very basic test to just ensure that I can actually go to the website. So my first test here is it, and then you give a description, typically like should something. And then you have this function here, and that's where you do your actual test. So as I was mentioning before, when we were talking about the ESLint rules, there's this sci object, and this is where most of the Cypress functionality comes from in terms of commands. So this first command here is sci.visit. So sci.visit means literally go to a web page @/. Now, the configuration I was talking about, and we'll see this in the files shortly when we get into VS Code, but there's a base URL, so like the base website. So whether that's, like myawesomesite.com or whatever, Cypress is aware of that. So you don't have to actually type in the actual website name. It just knows if you go to /, that means go to the root of the website. And this is also actually a good thing as well, because I was talking before how you might run this in different environments. So imagine if your local development is running on localhost :3000, but then where you're running it in a deployment, maybe it's at like some testing site.org or whatever. You don't want to have like duplicates of all these tests where you have to just copy paste in the different URLs. So that's why you have this configuration where you can say, this is what like my base website is called. And that makes it easy to make these tests portable in any environment. Okay, so that's like, this is what I would say is probably one of the basic tests that you could have. So let's go to demo time. All right, so I'm just going to switch screens here, and can everybody see that? Okay, cool. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start the Collab Lab project. So I'm going to run npm run start, and I'm trying to remember whose project I took, but we're just going to wait a sec. It's going to load up. If somebody from this team is in here, you can let me know. But so here's this app, so the Smart Shopper app. And so let's see here. Let's just take a peek at here real quick. So let's say get started, and then let's say let's start your list, and let's give it a name. So let's say like Demo Palooza, and I'll just say add item, and then it says success, it added something. I just got to move my zoom bar here because it's in the way. And so now if we go back to the list view, we're going to see I have this thing down here. So it looks like it added something. I'm not too familiar with this current app, but like basically we added something and it's in a list. It's in this inactive list because it hasn't been purchased recently. So, okay, so that's just showing us that we have this is a site that's actually working. So let's go to VS Code again. I'm going to open up another tab, and I'm just going to open up the package.json for a sec here. And so this is, to be clear, this is an existing TCL project. And what I did was I just added Cypress to the project. So we can talk a bit briefly about that. So here's the Cypress testing library I was talking about from Kent C. Dodds and the open source maintainers. And here's Cypress. And then there's the ESLint plugin Cypress that I mentioned. All these scripts here, these existed before. It looks like this was from a Create React app. And I added this new command here. I called it E2E for end-to-end testing. And what it's going to do is it's going to run Cypress with this open argument. So if we come here, I'm just going to run npm run E2E. And you're going to see it starting up Cypress, and we're going to end up at the screen I was showing you in the slide deck. So I'm just going to make this a little bigger. You can see here, it says it's configured. And we're going to come here and I'm going to say, let's go in Chrome, sure. And let's just bring this here. So now you're going to see there's this screen here where this is the list of tests we have. And if we come back to VS Code for a sec, I'm just going to go for that. There's this file called smoketest.sci.js. And this is the test that I was showing in the slide deck. Now, if we come back over here to Chrome, I'm going to run the test now. So if you want to run a test in the UI here, in the user interface, you just click on it. And you're going to see I'm in an actual browser. And you're going to see on the left here, I'll zoom it in a little bit, said smoke test should be able to visit the app, and it visited / and we can see that we're at the home page and it loaded up. So that's great. So again, this is a basic test. So we're like, let's test this a little more. So we see here it's got Smart Shopper. So I'm going to right click on it and inspect it. And I'm going to zoom in here just because dev tools are always tiny too when we're doing this. And I'm going to inspect, and you're going to see here, okay, so it's an H1. Can everybody see the dev tools pretty clear there? Or I can, okay, perfect. And we're going to see what I was talking about before, which is it says self-n my-4 tech, like there's all these CSS classes. And we could say like if, I'm assuming most people are familiar with CSS selectors for finding elements on a page. So you can do that in Cypress as well. So like, let's for fun try and find this one. Like, I don't know. Let's try font dash these things here. I don't know, leading type, sure. So let's come back here to the tests, and I'm going to say sci.get. So sci.get is, think of that like document.query selector if you're doing front-end web development. It's the same kind of idea. So you're going to say get, and then we're going to have a text in here, and I've got Copilot already spoiling the fun here. Sorry, folks. But I'm going to say like, okay, let's go find this element, and let's say it's supposed to say Smart Shopper. Okay, so yeah, so we want to find an element on the page that has this class. So since it's a CSS class, these are CSS selectors. So we need to put a dot because it's a CSS class. And we're saying get that element, and it should contain, meaning containing text, Smart Shopper. So now if I come back to Chrome, it's going to rerun, and you're going to say, okay, I did find it. I found something with leading type there for the selector, and it's Smart Shopper. But like, what happens if all of a sudden we change the styling there, and like, I don't know, let me find that page. Is it home? Okay, so let's come, this is the actual code of the website, not the test now. And I don't know if I can find it, but actually, let's just look for Smart Shopper. Div, smoke test. Okay, it's probably here. So we were looking for leading type for the CSS class. So I'm going to just delete it temporarily. Let's come back to the tests. It's going to run. Okay, is it still finding it? Did it not reload? Let me see. Let's try rerunning. Oh, wait, I got to it's not auto saving, I think. Save it. Okay. Okay. All of a sudden the test failed. It's like, oh no, like what happened? Like my test was perfect. We just did some styling changes. So this is what I mean about, you don't want to rely on necessarily like selectors that are based on CSS classes. So let's kind of go back here. Let's put the styling back, and it's going to rerun, and I've got to save it. It's going to rerun if I rerun this. Okay, and it's all good again. Whew. We undid the styling changes, and our tests are still rock solid. So what we could do instead is we could maybe be more specific. And so if we close this, just give it a little space here. Okay, so instead of looking for leading tight, let's maybe look for an H1. So it's the header one element, which we saw in the JSX a second ago. If we come here, that should run, and it found it. We say get the H1. That's pretty good, but I think we could do better. We want to look for stuff. If we use Cypress testing library, we could do sci.find by role. I hope I have it set up. And we could say heading. And here, it's going to correct it. Okay. We're not looking for welcome to the app. We're looking for Smart Shopper again. Let's see if I have this set up. Okay, it's set up. So here we're being a little more descriptive. It's still the same thing as if we had the H1, but think of this from an accessibility standpoint. We're like, okay, go find me a heading and make sure it has this text. And I think this is potentially more valuable because, like, if you want somebody, like, say for example, like maybe these are probably buttons, I don't know, or maybe, yeah, they're buttons, but like say they weren't, you know, like we would want, if somebody was writing the test for this, they might be like, okay, go get me the button that has the get started text in it. And then all of a sudden the test doesn't work. And it's like, oh, well, the button's not actually a button, it's a div. So, you know, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that your application is going to be accessible, but it does allow you to find things by like what their semantic things, like if you're using semantic HTML. So I could do sci.find by role again, and let's do button, for example, and let's do not name, it's Copilot is trying to be too smart here, and let's say getting started. And if we come back to Chrome, okay, find by role button, is that right? I might have the wrong text. Oh, get started. Okay, so I wrote an invalid test. It's get started. And if we come back here, we can see that it did find the button, which is good. And this just, again, it doesn't necessarily guarantee your site is going to be accessible, but by querying for things using like accessible things, like go find me a header, go find me like the main tag and stuff, you can at least promote like hopefully people writing accessible things. So it's just something that's kind of useful. Let's do something a little more involved here. So let's come back here and, okay, so we found the button, and let's just say we're going to use what's called an alias. So you can say as, and then you can say get started. And then what we can do is we can say sci.get@getstarted.click. So what this means is this is a reference to the button that we found here. So now if I come back to the tests here, you're going to see it run, and it clicked the button, and then all of a sudden we got to this next page. And this is getting back to what I was talking about initially about what end-to-end testing gives you, is you can actually go through the whole flow like an actual user in your site. So, okay, so now we have this start your list. So, you know, and the thing is, one thing to know about these tests is they can take some time to write, but I think the benefit of them is typically worth it. When you're writing tests, there are trade-offs, because writing these tests, like I said, can be time consuming. You also have to maintain them. So you don't necessarily want to literally test everything on your site. Maybe in some cases it makes sense to have some component testing, which we won't talk about today, but or unit tests for certain things. Like maybe, so we have this add to shopping cart, but like maybe you have some checkout flow at some point, like if it's an e-commerce site and you have some function in your code that calculates tax for like a country or like a state or province, you'd probably want to write some unit tests for that to just say like when it's this country and the price is this, the tax applied should be this or whatever. But in the flow of the end-to-end test, you might just want to not bother testing that, but you just might want to just go like add to shopping cart, go to checkout. I'm expecting this total. So you could, I would say generally you want to test things that are what we would say is like a critical workflow. So that would be like, you want to make sure your login always works. Like if somebody logs out, that works. Adding to a shopping cart in the case of like what we're looking at, for example, and anything that's like super critical. Like if this did not work, you know, like it's probably not good. So like, let's test this. But again, there's a balance of what you test, and it's a little out of the scope of what we're talking about today, because we're just kind of doing an intro to end-to-end testing. But you'll see over time, you'll realize like, okay, it makes sense to write unit tests for this, but this particular thing, that should be an end-to-end test. And this is not something you'll just get overnight. This is something you'll acquire as you gain more experience in the industry, and also speaking to your peers. Okay, so having said that, let's kind of just have some fun here, going through the flow here. So if we come back to the site here, so like I clicked on that button, so now there's this start your list. I'm assuming this is a button again. So if we inspect it, okay, so this is interesting. I think this one is a div. Okay, yeah, so it is a div. So I would have thought that that might have been a button, maybe. Okay, no, it's a link. Okay, so that's okay. So it's just styling, but we want to find a link perhaps. So, and it's called start your list. So I'm just going to copy this, and let's come back to the tests here. And then we want to do side.find. And there's a lot of great commands in Cypress, but I tend to lean towards the Cypress testing library for a lot of these things, for when I'm finding elements. So let's see here. We're going to look for start your list. So find by role link. And these names, like you might not be familiar with them right away, but as you start working with these things more, you'll get more familiar with these things. Like I guarantee you the first time you write one of these tests, it'll probably take you a long time. But like once you start writing more and more of them, it'll just become a lot. I don't want to say easier, but it'll be less painful maybe. So, all right, so I'm going to save this, and let's come back and let's run the test again. So it clicks our button here, and then we're back on the start your list. And did it find that? Okay, it's still running actually. Sorry. Okay, so we got to the start your list. Did it run my thing? What's going on here? Okay, expected A to exist in the, okay, so it found the link. Okay, so again, and you don't, we can use an alias like this. Like if you're doing several things, instead of saying find the button every time, the alias can make sense. But you can also do what's called chaining. So it's called a fluent API. It just means like you can do dot this, dot that. Like if you've ever done any jQuery, that's called a fluent API. So here we want to say it should exist. I'm not going to bother with it should exist, because I'm just going to say dot click, because if it doesn't exist, the click's going to fail. So let's save this and let's come back. I'm going to close the dev tools, and we're going to let it run. And okay, so something failed here. Get started. What's it saying here? Let's take a peek here. Get started dot click. Okay. Did I change? Oh, I changed the wrong thing, I think. No. Let's try that again. Let's see here. It's a demo. It's like live streaming. Nothing's ever perfect. Okay, so let's see if that runs this time. That's weird. Oh, I'm doing dot click dot click. Why is that? That's weird. Let me undo what I did. Okay, I'm just doing a time check too. We've got about, we're done at 6 p.m. Is that right, Tatiana?
Yeah,
Or sorry, in like 15
works.
minutes? Yeah, okay.
We
Cool.
also have
So,
another question whenever is a convenient time for you to stop for a second.
yeah, no, we can do it now.
What checklist of factors do you consider when choosing what elements to test with end-to-end testing? Is there like best practices?
Yeah, so I think a good way to approach it is don't think of these tests from a developer's perspective. think about this as like, you know, I always think about like my mom's always calling me about problems with the internet. And so like, I kind of try to envision like, what if my mom was trying to click on this site and do something? And this is not to diss any moms. That's not what I mean. It's just, she's like, okay, I just want to click on the thing. I want to get my thing. So like, you want to go through the flow like a real user. So don't think about it like, okay, I need to get the CSS selector for this and this. Like, okay, I'm looking at the page. Like if we come back to the actual site here, like forget the broken test for a second, but like, okay, there's a get started button. So I want to click on the get started button. Like I would literally, maybe the first few times that you write some tests, like really write down what you want to do. Okay, I went to the home page. I want to click on get started. And then I'm going to have to load the actual site. Just a sec here. No, that's not what I want to run. But there we go. Okay, so like think of it like a real user. Okay, I'm at the home page. I want to click get started. If it load, yeah, okay. And then I want to start your list. Like me as a user, I don't care about that spinner that we saw there. I just know I want to click on this next and this, and then I want to get to here and like focus on those things. And then once you have like, okay, you know what you need to click on, that's when you kind of put your developer hat back on, and then you'd be like, okay, so let's come back to the test. Okay, they wanted, okay, they don't care so much about the title maybe, but they're like, okay, there's a button called get started. I need to go find that. So, you know, let's do it however we want, whether that's using like Cypress testing library or sci.get. Let's go find that button. And, you know, like we don't even need this should exist. We could just do like .click or whatever. But, you know, really looking at what's on the page, that's like, you kind of have to treat the web page like a black box in the sense that you don't care what the internals are. And the other thing about end-to-end testing is it literally does not matter what framework you wrote your website in, because the testing framework doesn't care that it's React, it's Angular, that it's a PHP website. All it's doing is saying, go find me something and then do something with that and then do something else and so on. It's kind of like you're kind of, it's kind of like, you know, reverse breadcrumbs of Hansel and Gretel. Maybe, I don't know. That's a terrible example. but basically it's literally the steps to do something and think of it from the user perspective. And then I think that will help you, that'll help guide you choose like what selectors make sense. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
I think that makes sense. Yeah, basically think as a user and forget whatever code you wrote. Just look at the page and figure out what buttons you're going to click, what links you have to go to.
Yeah, no, exactly. So let's see if this works again. I don't know what I broke, but it's also demo time. So I always take this risk when I do live demos. Let's come back to the test here. Okay, it's not finding something, but that's okay. Okay, so it's not finding the link, it looks like. Okay, so that's okay. So it looks like it didn't click the get started maybe, which is weird. Find the button. Okay, anyways, I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but because this is really just a demo, but you could essentially keep going through. So then you'd say like, okay, I found my link and then I want to, you know, click it. And then maybe on the next page, you're there like sci.find by role, you know, like list item or something, or like another button and then click something and then add something and basically build the whole flow. And I think that's kind of what you want to do. It is bugging me that the test is failing, but I honestly don't know why at the moment. So after this talk, I am definitely going to go look at it. I did want to mention though that this code is available on GitHub. I'm going to update the README because if we come to GitHub, where is it? TCL. Okay, yeah. So the code's here. I'll go back to the slide deck now, but the code's available here. I have to update the README because the README is literally what the TCL project one was. I'll put some notes about it. It's the talk about Cypress. But let's go back to the slide deck for a second here. And yeah, so there's the demo source code, and there's some resources here that you can check out. There's the Cypress documentation and the Cypress testing library, and also the ESLint plugin, which I think are super useful. The other thing I want to talk about is if we come back real quickly to here, I'm going to go back to the basic test because I clearly broke something. I'm going to stop Cypress for a second here. And let's go to the package JSON again. So I have this Cypress open. This is perfect when I'm doing local development. Like I have the user interface, I can see my tests, I can click on them, I can inspect in the browser. But when you're running this in your continuous integration, continuous deployment, you're not going to literally be in front of that computer. It's like somewhere in the cloud, who knows where. So you want to be able to run what's called headless mode, which is a funny way. I don't know who came up with that term, but basically headless browsers have existed for a while now, and they're super useful for when running tests, and especially end-to-end tests. So I'm going to say E/E::CI, just short for continuous integration. And then here, unless my memory is failing me, it should be Cypress run. So what's going to happen is it's going to run, we only have that one test there, the smoke test. I've got the website still running, so I'm going to run npm run E/E, but instead of the ET, I'm going to do the CI, and this is going to run Cypress, but in run mode. And you're going to see it's running the tests, and you're going to see it ran one test and the test passed. And this is all in your console. And this is what you would see like if you were maybe using a GitHub action, or Cypress even has their own tools to run this in the cloud. This is what you would see. So like, okay, yeah, you know, like when you have a pull request up and there's like, did this check pass? And then did this check pass? One of them would be like end-to-end test. And then if it failed or passed, you could click on that and you would probably see something like this. It would say like what it's running, and then, you know, it'll show you the test results. And if there was a failure, and you can see here, I was talking about video before. It generated a video because I didn't change the configuration. So if I click on this, is that going to open? Maybe not. Okay, that's TCL Meetup MP4. Let me go find it just for 1 second, just to show you, because I think this is super useful. So if we come in here and it's in Cypress videos. Okay, so let's open this up. So just remember, like, so what I'm showing you is we ran this in the console, like as just in your terminal, and this is actually what ran. It's a headless browser, but we can see that it's obviously not super like great quality maybe, but you can see that the test ran and we can see that it passed. If there was a failure, we could see something in there, maybe the button is literally missing and that's why the test failed. And then we're like, and that's something that you might not see because it's running just in the terminal. So just wanted to mention that. I know I talked briefly about it.
Nick, can you quickly explain a little bit about what a headless browser is, or headless in general?
Yeah. So let's go to I don't know if you would say it's a headed browser, but like think of your web browser right now. Okay, I can see it. I can interact with it. What a headless browser is, it's literally running a web browser, but there's no user interface that you can interact with. It can only be done like by commands, and like it's like there's no way, like even if that Cypress run was happening and I'm trying to click on my mouse, there's literally nowhere to click. It's running it in a process, and it's headless because this allows us to run it in the cloud or as part of a continuous integration or a deployment. Because in those scenarios, you don't have a literal browser like user interface. Because the other thing is, like, say you're on a Windows machine, when it's running in the cloud, like as part of your deployment, chances are those machines are a Linux machine, and it's just running the thing. So like you wouldn't even get like your Windows browser in there. I think there's tools like Browser Stack that actually run it, an actual browser, like with the user interface maybe, but that's kind of the difference. Like think about like literally everything happening in the browser but you can't see it. But with those recordings, you can see that there's like these things are still happening and like the UI is still being generated. It's just you can't see it. So I think they went with headless, just kind of like the same thing with headless CMS, because like, it's just not something you see, but you can still use it. So that's kind of I don't know, whoever came up with that, I feel like they should have a picture of the headless horseman as their mascot or their logo. So that's
Naming
kind
convention,
of
constant struggle with naming convention.
yeah, naming is hard. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I just wanted to mention that about the if you're running it in a continuous integration, continuous deployment kind of scenario, that's when you would want to do Cypress run versus Cypress open. Okay, and yeah, the slide deck is available. It's live right now, so you can grab that. I think Tatiana will be sharing this after, but if not, I can share it as well. And that's pretty much it. We got about 5 minutes left. I'm still annoyed that that test was breaking because it looks totally fine to me. But anyways, I digress. Yeah, I was just wondering if folks had any other questions or thoughts.
Would you run these tests manually in UI or would this be automated?
Well, in terms of the UI, like I think the first thing would be like when I'm building it out, I would probably click through it like manually in the actual site just to kind of take notes of what I need to do. And then from there, I would write the test. And one thing to mention too is I don't think you should write the end-to-end test as you're building the thing. I think for this kind of testing, wait till you've finished everything, because these tests are more time consuming. So if you change the UI a bit or just how it works, I think it's better to wait till the end or like maybe start a bit of it. But because again, these tests are typically the ones that take the longest to write. And the other thing I'll mention, if sometimes you'll hear people saying that tests are flaky. And what they mean is this can be all kinds of different types of tests, but in the case of end-to-end tests, it'll be like I was saying before, like that button's not showing up and the test is failing. So why is that? And a lot of end-to-end testing is really just like, go find something, wait till something else is there. It's so you really have to understand how your application is working. So like, who knows, maybe like we saw a spinner there before, and I think that's why the test might have been failing actually. So like when I clicked on the get started, it brought me to that other page, but then there was this spinner loading. And so then I was trying to click on the button right away, but maybe the button isn't ready yet because this, like the spinner means the page is still loading up something. So, maybe as part of your flow, you might have something that says, okay, there should be a spinner on the page. And then, once that's gone, you can write a test to say like, make sure it's not there as well. Then you can say, now go click on the button and stuff. And this is where you'll see a lot of stuff that can become flaky. It's because sometimes it could be actually like there's an actual bug in your program, which that's happened to me before as well. But a lot of times it could just be like you missed a step in writing the test to like wait to get to the next step. So, and these are things that there's no magic solution to it. Honestly, you're gonna, just through experience of writing these tests, you're gonna come to realize, oh yeah, like you're gonna be telling somebody else 2 years from now, oh yeah, you didn't check for the spinner, that's why it's breaking, or so. Like any other skill, it takes some time, but I think it's really worth your investment to look into end-to-end testing. There's definitely other testing too, like the component testing and unit testing, like I said. It's a whole bigger topic, but there's trade-offs when you write tests and stuff. And you have to remember too that you have to maintain these tests as well. So, it's kind of like documentation. It's great if you have documentation, but if you only do it at the beginning and then you just never touch it again, the documentation is actually not necessarily a good thing, because like so many things have changed, but the docs didn't, so it's something And I guess the last thing I'll do it. Yeah, we got about a minute here. I think the last thing would be is it's not so much about end-to-end testing, but when you're working on something, like whether that's, you know, in a job, you know, it's like when you're estimating things, and I think people in general are terrible at estimating things, myself included, but when you're going to do some work, you know, assuming that your team is bought into doing testing, you can say like, no, this isn't going to take 2 weeks. This is going to take 3 weeks because we also have to do the testing, and that's going to take some time. And you have to kind of get buy-in from people. But once you do, I think you'll see the benefits of it. You'll be shipping things with more confidence, and it'll also kind of become a natural reflex. Oh yeah, I'm reviewing the PR. Oh, can you add some tests? You know, and you just kind of have to ingrain that into your team's culture if you can. So, and with that, we're like right at 6 p.m. I'm impressed that I finished right at 6, so I feel good about that.
Thank you very much, Nick. This was really informative, really great. And thank you everybody for joining.
Yeah, no, thanks everybody for attending. I know everybody's in different time zones, so I appreciate you taking the time out of your day. And like I said, the slide deck and the source code will be up, and I'm definitely going to go look at that code. I'm pretty sure it's the spinner. So
I'll include the links when we post the video to YouTube.
okay, perfect.